Color theory, what's that hippie dip? Put on a mood ring. Tell me your future. This video will be about how I approach color, and I will tell you, I'm very lazy when it comes to color theory. Honestly, this video is going to be a little different than your average color theory video that talk about hue, tone, shade, what is warm, what is cool, how does it feel, balance the piece. Yeah, I'm not really going to go much into that. There's tons of videos like that in the actual theory of things, but this is a lazy artist's approach to color theory. So if you don't know what any of that is at all, let me give you the 90-second recap, and then I will get into my lazy methods. The palette of a particular piece of artwork will drastically affect the mood of a piece. At its simplest form, there are warm colors and cool colors. However, it gets a bit more complicated than that, as every color has a warm variant and a cool variant. The saturation or desaturation of something can also play a big role. A desaturated piece, something that has a lot of tone, that is pushing more towards the gray area of our color cube, on average will feel colder, and something pushing more towards the saturated end, the purest color of a particular hue. In a color cube, this is in the top right corner. On a color sphere, it is on the outer edges. This is where it maxes out, baby. However, one of the biggest issues I see with newer students is they overdo things. They want to make a warm piece. They pump all the reds and yellows and oranges, but then the piece becomes all one note. So using saturated warmth or desaturated colder colors strategically in places where you want that impact to happen. As everything is relative, an object will look warmer just based on how cool the things are around it. Kind of like how even you are looking a little toasty next to your ugly friends. If you compare these two scenes, even though the nighttime feels colder and the outside feels more desaturated, in contrast, the warm light coming from these structures feels even warmer than the daylight scene. The lighting of a scene, or the lack of lighting, can play a big role in this. Ooh, don't make it too warm, don't make it too cold. Oh, you gotta balance it out, oh, blah, blah, blah. I know some people like to paint grayscale and then put in the color later. We'll talk about that. But for me, I like to keep it simple right at the beginning. I like to break down the local colors. And then we can add the lighting. Then we can make it all complicated, artsy, or whatever. Establishing the local colors of your entire piece, and then moving on to the shadows and the highlights and all that stuff that complicates a piece and makes it a bit more difficult to comprehend. Obviously, if you're using like photo references and you're painting photorealistic, it can be a lot easier to get those resources to figure out something. But if you're like me and you paint a lot of things that just simply do not exist, starting from big to small or simple to complex, keep from overwhelming yourself right out of the gate. Color is often one of the first things that people notice when they see a piece. So if it's distracting or dejointing the composition in some way, it can be really apparent and feel like a skill gap even if the rendering and the composition is sublime. So oftentimes less is more, especially if you're unsure about how to approach color theory. For me, I like to start off with an analogous palette, as you can see here. And the reason I like to start off with palettes like this is because it's really easy to unify a piece of artwork. These are colors that are all very similar on the color wheel, and I think these are great ways to start a piece. We don't need to overcomplicate things, especially when you're coming up with your compositions and, you know, your rendering and your line work and all that hard, really juicy stuff that's super important. You know, we just ask ourselves, is the painting gonna be red? You can start there, right? And then as you get going, you can start adding complexity to your color palette, or at least that's what my lazy ass does. And as you go along, does it need more? Does it need less? Is adding the whole rainbow doing anything for this piece? Yes or no? Complementary palettes are based off of colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel. These types of palettes can be great ways to strategically move your eye around a piece. For me, I love fusing analogous and complementary palettes together, a Hannah Montana best of both worlds situation. Similar to a split complementary palette or whatever, and I'll typically use that complementary color strategically to pull your eye around the piece in an intentional way. If you look at this illustration here, you will see that the girl's hair is the main area that complementary color exists, which immediately draws the viewer's eyes to that focal point right away, and then more subtly on the seal of the envelope, drawing your eye upward, then allowing you to experience that interaction between the two characters. Learning any of these terms isn't all that important. However, you should learn your way around one of these bad boys. I don't want to get political or anything, but personally I prefer the cube as it's a bit better on my math brain. And in other words, this is a long-winded way of me explaining the 80-20 rule, or the 60-40. Whatever percentage comes to you in the middle of the night and demands representation. I'll put the terms up on the screen for those who like to read or whatever, but I think these are always a great way to start something out. 80-20% being if you want something a lot more contrasty to give a bit more kick, and 60-40 being a more subtle palette typically. And obviously this topic can go far more in depth than this video is going to cover, but this should be a decent starting point for most people. But what if you want to start off with a monochromatic palette and add color later? So let's talk about gradient maps. This is a great way just to focus on the values and not worry about the color at all. And once you have established a value structure to your painting, you can utilize this method to add color very quickly. This works a little better with more painterly styles, but you can utilize it on any piece. I actually used to use this for my photography back when I had hobbies. So I will show you how to use gradient maps within Procreate. However, there are more robust versions of this in Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint. So if you go up here and you go to this wand tool here, you can see gradient maps right here under canvas. And you'll already notice that there's some presets where it is assigning colors based on the value structure. But none of these are working for me, so I'm gonna hit the little plus to start a new one, and it's gonna default to black and white. So on the right, you have your brights all the way to pure white, and on the left, you have all the way to pure black, and everything in the middle. And when using gradient maps, you can assign a color to those value percentages, and they will kind of naturally blend together depending on where you have put assignments. So as you see here, I am assigning this like peachy color to the midtones. However, what if you want to assign a color to a specific area of your piece? Let's start by giving the central figure some skin tones. So what I've done here is I've separated anywhere that has the skin tones on the central character, and that way I can then go to my gradient maps so it will only affect that layer. So already right off the bat, we have that preset that we made earlier, and we can try to start making something that feels a bit more natural. But let's get some more warmth there. What if I want more of a like natural peachy tone? You can kind of move this around as it assigns to the specific value structure of your piece. So this is a really quick way you can adjust or add colors to, say, a monochromatic painting. And we continue on this path with this other character over here. So let's make her skin tone a little bit fairer. Maybe we'll bring in a deep orange to some of the rim lighting. So that might be a quick way you could play around with your pieces. Now that we have these skin tones, let's adjust the rest of the piece. So we'll add our own layer here as well. If you've already painted in the value structure, it's definitely good to try to keep those colors within that value structure. Obviously, adding like a neon green to something that should be like in the 80% darkness range might feel a little wacky. As you get closer to the actual value structure of your piece, it starts to feel a bit more natural. Gradient maps, I think, are a great starting off point. Personally, I don't like them for finished products, but it can keep you from doing a full paint over for the entire piece and give you a good foundation to work on. Some artists to look at who are known for using gradient maps in their work are Pete Moorbacher and Mark Burnett.
Welcome back. I've missed you.
They both also have videos on this topic if you want a more robust look into how to best utilize this process. But what if you've already committed to a palette and you're halfway through a piece and you don't like how the colors are turning out? I actually have a little trick for you. Unfortunately, Procreate does not have this tool, so sadly I'm going to have to open up Photoshop for this one. As you can see, I have this Lucky Rabbit piece. And you'll want to go to the layer that you want to adjust. So right now, I think I want to turn this green foliage down here into more of a yellowish fall color. And I've separated the rabbit from the actual foreground just to make sure it only affects the foreground here. So you'll go up to image right here at the top and then hit adjustments. And then down at the bottom, it'll be replace color. And you'll get this little window here. And what essentially will happen is you will have this eyedrop tool. So you'll want to go over the color that you want to replace or change. So for me, it's this green color here. And as you can see by this fuzziness bar, which is actually the threshold of how much it affects. So 0 just being the exact color that you color picked, and then the higher the number, anything farther away from that color. So we'll go somewhere here, and then it should only affect the things that are in this little icon here. So for me, I want to change the hue from a green to a yellowish color. So as you can see, it is kind of shifting that. I think somewhere around there, but as you can tell, it's not affecting as much as I want. It's not kind of capturing all of the foliage yet, so I will up this fuzziness bar, and that looks pretty good, but I think it's a little dark. You can actually bring up the brightness right in here as well based on your selection, and then you can also mess with the saturation. So that's kind of the effect that I wanted to go for, and that's a great way to adjust colors within the same layer without affecting the rest of the piece. As another example, let's say I want to change the glowing color in the background of this piece, but I'm not sure what I want to change it to. So we can also use replace color just to try out our options. So I'll go over here and color pick this blue color here, and then I will just kind of go through the different hues and see if there's anything within here that suits my fancy. And that's replace color, which I think is an underrated tool. For me, color theory is about balancing out a composition and making sure that your eye doesn't move where I don't want it to. For instance, this Misty piece started out with a full palette, and for a while I couldn't figure out why everything felt really unbalanced. I felt like I was having a really good synergy between these like bluish, shadowy colors and these like orangey yellows. And I think the green of these trees just really kind of conflicted with those. So ultimately I decided to turn them more of a fall yellow color, and everything seemed to kind of work after that, as the trees weren't really a priority or a focal point, so changing them to something that more complemented the palette itself fixed the problem I had with this particular palette, as this yellow was already represented in this palette through Misty's shirt and some other elements in the background. So removing a color that wasn't necessarily simplified everything and made it work more cohesively. Or if you want to master the art of lazy color theory, why not add no color at all? The easiest way to unify your palette. Just ask my friend Von Art. It's been working pretty well for him so far.